The man stood on tiptoe and pulled open the mailbox door. Countless letters spilled out and crashed to the ground, each containing a reservation check. As Albert picked them up, he grumbled about how insane these people were to fall for their scheme. He promptly opened a bank account under the pretense of patriotic memorials and withdrew all the money from the checks, 3 million francs stuffed into a leather suitcase. When he got home, the first thing he did was find the landlady and buy her foster daughter, Louise. He intended to take her with them when they fled, for she was the only one who could make Edward smile. While Albert meticulously planned their escape date and route, Edward seemed distracted, as if he didn't care where their future led. Sneaking a few stacks of cash from the suitcase, Edward crafted a lion mask from the bills, put it on, and danced joyfully. After a moment of shock, Albert and Louise joined in. The three spun to music in the shabby attic, as if they'd already escaped danger and were living happily in distant Africa. Suddenly, Edward's expression darkened. He smelled a familiar scent on Albert's borrowed suit jacket, his sister Lena's perfume. Albert's attempts to defend himself died when Edward confirmed it was a custom fragrance made for Lena alone. With no choice, Albert confessed everything. When Edward learned his sister had married the despicable Lieutenant Pratt, the demon who disfigured him, he was devastated. He collapsed onto the bed, put on his sad-faced mask, and sank into a morphine-induced sleep. Edward reverted to his former lifeless state. Albert's heart broke for him. Fearing Edward would waste away in despair, Albert went into the city to confront Lena and expose Lieutenant Pratt's true nature. But one glimpse of Lieutenant Pratt from across the street sent Albert fleeing in terror. Returning home, he found Edward dressed in bizarre women's clothing, determined to confront Lieutenant Pratt in his own way. They went to the pension administration and targeted an official from the honor roll, Joseph Merlin, an inspector who'd worked for 30 years without a promotion. He was either incompetent or an upright man overlooked for his honesty. But Edward bet on the latter. With a single anonymous letter, Edward lured Joseph Merlin to the cemetery overseen by Lieutenant Pratt. The letter accused a funeral company of using undersized coffins, 150 centimeters instead of 170 centimeters, to embezzle materials, stuffing them with fragmented remains. Joseph Merlin proved diligent, photographing each exhumed coffin. As alleged, most contained jumbled body parts, rendering the identified crosses fraudulent. He realized every marked cross in the cemetery hid an unknown corpse. Furious, Merlin vowed to right the wrongs and make the perpetrators pay. When Lieutenant Pratt arrived, Merlin ignored him and pried open another coffin, to find it filled with 100,000 francs in cash. It was more money than Merlin had earned in a decade. Would this overlooked man cave to temptation? From a distant hill, Edward and his friends watched through binoculars. Edward wore a repaired mask of his own face, but while it hid his physical scars, it couldn't mend the wounds in his soul. His sorrow only deepened. Meanwhile, the monument project advanced. 5 designs reached the final round, delivered to Mr. Perricot's office for his approval. Mr. Perricot paced slowly, hands behind his back, studying each sketch and sinking into thought. Suddenly, he leaned in sharply, staring at one sketch, then grabbed a magnifying glass to compare it with his son's paintings. The identical signature, Edward's distinct mark. How could it be here? Mr. Perricot immediately signed the check for this design, desperate to meet the artist, believing he held a connection to his son. But Jules d'Espremont was a phantom. No such person existed. Lieutenant Pratt was roused from his mistress's bed with grave news. The official he'd bribed with 100,000 francs had turned on him. The upright Joseph Merlin had not only submitted a damning report but pasted every bribe note, 8 centimeters thick, to it and sent it to the cabinet. With irrefutable evidence, Lieutenant Pratt realized he was doomed. Even his loyal men abandoned him. In desperation, he begged his wife to intercede with her father, the wealthy Mr. Perricot. After all, the Perricots could fix his troubles with a single phone call. But Lena refused. She would not, and did not want to, get involved in her husband's scandals. To Lena, a woman of wealth and power, husbands were mere distractions. An unfaithful husband's only use was to legitimize her children. Now, his purpose was served. Lieutenant Pratt wondered why he was the one punished when so many had profited from the war. As he struggled, his estranged father-in-law approached, offering to fix his troubles if he found the con artist Jules d'Espremont. Mr. Parricott couldn't explain his urgency. It was a hunch, a need to meet this man. Otherwise, he knew he'd regret it. Lieutenant Pratt, no fool, traced the trio to their abandoned attic. But when he opened the door, it was empty. Edward, indifferent to the world, had moved to a luxury hotel, hosting wild parties where he invented a game trying to corrupt politicians who'd fuel the war. But after each orgy of drink and drugs, emptiness consumed him, relieved only by clinging to Albert, his last connection to humanity. Still, he suffered. As National Day neared and their scam unraveled, Albert planned their escape, while Edward watched them tenderly. His blue eyes, however, betrayed that his mind was not on the future, though no one truly understood him. On the eve of National Day, Lieutenant Pratt tracked Edward to his hotel and rushed to Mr. Parricott for reward. True to his word, Mr. Parricott called the minister to quash Merlin's evidence. Free from danger, Lieutenant Pratt's lecherous nature resurfaced. He accosted a maid in the Parricott mansion before even leaving. Albert witnessed the assault. Albert had fallen for the kind maid on his first visit to the Parricott home. He'd come to confess his feelings and, if reciprocated, flee with her for a new life. Instead, he found Lieutenant Pratt harassing her. Fueled by old hatred and new rage, the timid Albert resolved to confront the bastard. He followed Lieutenant Pratt to the cemetery and pulled a gun. As Lieutenant Pratt stumbled back, he fell into a pit of quicksand. The quicksand swallowed him rapidly, a grim echo of the innocent soldiers he drowned in lies and greed. It was a fitting punishment from a higher power. Horrified by the accidental death, Albert fled to a train station room to wait for Edward. But Edward would not come. Dressed in Albert's suit and a gorgeous peacock mask, Edward lay in the hotel chair. He only stirred when Louise shook him, like a prince roused from slumber. Mr. Parricott arrived with the monument sketch he'd purchased. He wasn't there to demand his 150,000 francs but to ask why the signature matched his son's. Their eyes met, and Mr. Parricott froze, as if choked by the truth. He recognized the sapphire gaze of Edward. He didn't reveal his suspicion, instead speaking as a stranger, but praising his son. "I am proud of my son," he said. Tears spilled from Edward's eyes, validation he'd waited 20 years to hear. In that moment, they let go of grievances, reconciling with each other and themselves. But it was too late for the proud, talented young man who could not bear his flawed life. Edward stepped back from his father's embrace and turned, leaping like a hawk diving from the sky. The sky was his destiny, and only angels could truly fly. Albert was arrested but freed by a police inspector, the father of Thériault, the first soldier killed in the Battle of Hill 113. The inspector let Albert go, allowing him to flee to Africa with his lover and Louise, carrying Edward's hope for a better life.